Today we're talking about how to stretch if you're injured, and there's a huge mistake that people are making, which is that people treat stretching as this cure-all magic bullet for if you're injured. It's a really big mistake, and today we're going to go quite deep on why that is. Stick around.
What's up, everyone? My name is Yanni Burmeister. To my left is Phil White. Across the table is Rad, my brother. Behind the mixer is Richie. We are Unity Gym and the UMS and the Sound of Movement podcast. We should start saying. How is everyone?
Pretty good.
Great.
Pretty good.
There are a few greater joys in life than getting a really good spike in beach volleyball. There's just something about it that just brings so much joy to me. And usually I have just very frustrating sessions where it's like, you get really close, but you never quite get a satisfying one. But I got 3 today, so I am buzzing. It seems ridiculous, but
it's like winning the lotto 3 times in one day.
Yeah, I'm a real team sports person, and I think it was especially after watching that Michael Jordan documentary. If you haven't watched The Last Dance, do it. And I think I relate a bit to him with just how pathologically competitive I am when it comes to team sports. So yeah, I'm all psyched up to this morning and ready to go.
I'm the same. So I think it just runs in team sport. Before we get started on today's topic, Tribe, let us know who's on the live stream. I can see we've got a few people tuning in the
Vinny,
UMS
Greg and Dave.
Movement
Hey guys,
Mastermind. Remember, everyone who's listening on the podcast, we love you long time, but we also love to see who you are. So come over to the UMS Movement Mastermind private Facebook group. Join the group and get amongst the action. Big love sent to everyone watching the replay.
Or send us a voice message, which you can do at the bottom of the description. All the descriptions come out. There's always a little link to click where you can really easily ask us a question or send us some love via voice message, which would be really cool.
There you go. We've had one, haven't we?
We've had one.
Yeah. And I was going to say much love to everyone watching the replay on YouTube. If you are watching the replay on YouTube, we have a lot coming on YouTube. I know we slowed down a little bit there, but it is coming. We're going to be producing some wicked new workouts and all sorts of cool stuff. Anyway. Today's topic is pretty important because, I for one fell victim to feeling like or thinking that stretching was a bit of a band-aid solution for discomfort and pain when in your body, and it was quite a revelation for me to learn. That when most strains or most discomfort after exercise or a lot of them, I would say, is some form or level of muscle tear. It can be very micro or very small or more serious. And the logic is just so obvious when you think about it. Someone once said to me, it actually wasn't Phil, it was another physio, said, think about it logically. If you had a cut to the surface of your skin, would you want to stretch the skin apart? And that just made a lot of sense to me. It was kind of
Yeah, I think it kind of comes from a place where it's something that I so commonly see as a physio that people come in to see me, and whenever I see someone, I always ask them, once we've kind of gone through a bit of an assessment, for them to tell me what they think is actually going on in their body and also what they think will help it, because I think it's so important when you're looking at rehabbing people. You've got to deal with their thoughts and beliefs to really get people on board, because if they believe that acupuncture is going to be the only thing that solves them, and I'm trying to give them exercise, and there's a real mismatch there. And it's just so common that people are like, I know I should be stretching, and I know there's probably just some stretches that I need for this, when they've got a issue that's really about muscular control or muscular capacity or joint quality of movement. And so I think it's just been kind of one of those things in the zeitgeist where stretching has just kind of got this real just otherworldly characteristic to it that somehow fixes everything, and people have a lot of guilt around not doing it enough. And I'm not at all saying that stretching is bad. I think it's such a great way to, as obviously we talk about it so much, as a great way to build mobility. But it as the cure-all for injuries, I think, is just a bit misplaced.
I think it's really bad. I think it comes from that stretching can, stretching and foam rolling and things like that it can give you an immediate relief of pain. if it's not like we're not talking about muscle tears here, but if you've got like pain and discomfort in your back, a lot of people have gone through that experience where they get shown a couple of stretches and they do them, and 5 minutes later, like, oh my God, my back feels so much better. And I think over a lifetime of that, like, you can have some leg pain and you do some hamstring stretches and some quad stretches, like even just the old school stuff of just holding the stretch for 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden you feel a bit better. And then people get injured and they think, oh, well, I'm just going to apply that same principle to this. I mean, that's just my 2 cents,
Yeah,
but I
definitely.
reckon
I agree.
that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
And it is a very misguided way of thinking, because what Yanni said is, I remember when we got told that, well, it was about 7 years ago here by Joe, and I
Joe Lim,
and I was the same. I was like, Jesus, I never thought of it that way before, but it makes so much sense. And most injuries, the more and more I spend time with you, Phil, and the more and more the deeper I go down, injuries are usually. They seem to come from a lack of load tolerance, like the body couldn't handle that load, and that's very rarely to do with flexibility, isn't it? It's usually to do with the lack of strength.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm going to go a little bit out into the reeds here, but another big revelation I had around stretching is that stretching doesn't actually, it's not the most effective way to produce mobility. Like, okay, I'll take that back. Rewind that statement. When you think of stretching, and most people think of stretching, and you got to understand, I spent 10 years working in a big gym, Fitness First, where, they had the free weights room on the 3rd floor. On the 1st floor, when you walked in, they had the cardio theatre and all the change rooms. On the lower floor, they had a yoga studio where they also did Pilates. They had a bigger studio where they did all their pump classes and their active classes and their boxing class and boxercise classes. And then they had a spin class. And then around sort of the corner, tucked in the corner, they had this stretch cage and a stretch diagram on the wall and like a ballet bar that was literally like their sort of stretching or cool down area, And you would only ever see people there doing passive stretching. That was literally it. They had a diagram on the wall showing you how to passively stretch, lots of muscles, maybe 40 muscles in your body, and there was this notion that that's what flexibility training was. It's just you sit there for a few seconds and do these stretches, or you go and do yoga, and it was a real revolutionary moment for me to realize that and learn that was not the best way to get flexible, to increase mobility, and it was actually Charles Poliquin that pointed that out to me. He said. And then I went and did another course on Olympic lifting. I did a certification to become an Olympic lifting coach. And the both of those guys said if you want to get better mobility, you're actually better off working up to doing full range or deeper range of movement under load, and it's the load and the strength, building strength in those movements that actually builds mobility. I would go further to say it's a combination of both, but there's just no notion of the concept of building strength to get flexible.
Yeah.
And we spoke about this a little bit yesterday, but it was a real breakthrough. Stretching is not the Band-Aid solution for getting it's certainly not the Band-Aid solution for injury, and that's what we're going to steer this conversation on, but it's not the Band-Aid solution for much. It's just a tool.
Yeah, 100%. And all tools need to be used right, or otherwise it's...
That's right.
Yeah, and we should really, before we go deeper in this, we should clarify. Anybody that's in this ecosystem most of the people come into our ecosystem because of flexibility. That's where most people come to us from. We have seemed to have found our niche, that we're the flexibility people, the people that teach flexibility and strength. And so most people come to us because they get the flexibility blueprint, or they watch one of our YouTube videos about flexibility. So we are not discrediting flexibility training, mobility training, all of that. We love it. It's huge. But this talk is just about the role of flexibility training in the process of rehabilitating an injury. And just to clarify and sum up what we've just said, it is not what you think. And Phil's going to go a bit deeper into it now.
Yeah, 100%. Good caveat. The thing with that I think as you talked about before, developed that idea that, stretching is the right thing to do because it sort of makes you feel better, is because people generally, when they have like a bit of an injury, it's this feeling of tightness. And I find a lot of people have even started replacing, patients that I work with have started replacing the word pain with tightness because they kind of don't want to,
admit they're in pain.
Admit they're in pain.
I'm not weak.
Yeah, exactly. And so oh yeah, it feels a bit tight when I do that. And so I'm really trying to get drill down and be like, does that mean it hurts, or does that mean you're struggling to get into that movement? I think it's people's sort of words have started to change how they actually think about things. So catch yourself if you are doing that. And yeah, just want to get back to that idea of that muscles get tight and spasm if they get overloaded. So I've talked a lot about that bucket and water analogy, that if you have every structure, and in this case we'll talk about muscles as having a capacity, and that means how big their bucket is, and the amount of load you put into that bucket is how much water you're putting into that tap. So if you have a bigger bucket, you can do more work before that muscle then gets overloaded, the water spills over the top, and that muscle reacts in some kind of spasming sort of way. So I think that's just a nice way of sort of thinking about things. And so basically, if you overflow your bucket by really drastically changing your behavior, whether that's suddenly you've sat in the car for a 8-hour drive and you didn't stand up all day, which is quite different to what you usually do, and that suddenly just mean the muscles that keep you in that position all day are going to be overloaded, or it means you come back from holiday and you go into the gym and you try and go straight back to where you left off, then you will be overloading that system and the muscles will spasm up in response. And so people sort of then jump to oh, I feel tight, and so therefore I'm just going to stretch things out. But those muscles have tightened up for a reason. It's a protective mechanism to be hey, we've got to, support it. In the back is a really common one. Hey, we've got to support the spinal cord in the, in the spinal canal, and we don't want all this excessive movement, and I can't handle controlling this movement anymore. So I'm going to lock it down. I'm going to make you feel make you really stiff, because stiff is better than out of control and injured. So, but then people are I've got to override this stiffness and start trying to stretch into
override the system. The system is wrong.
And so, and then this stretching load ends up, being it gives you kind of a immediate response of movement can be nice on the body, but it's not doing anything to address that capacity for work. And that's where we've got to.
And it's not only is it not doing anything to address the capacity for work. Sometimes it's doing some major damage, because if you do have tears in the tendons or the muscle body, then by stretching it and opening them up, you're doing real damage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to understand there's lots of different types of injuries, and we'll kind of break it into the two things that I usually think about, which is active structures, so your muscle and your tendons, or your passive structures. That's going to be bone injuries, joint injuries, so cartilage or joint capsule as well. And so it's really important to understand that with the muscle, so those active structure ones, if you've got an acute tear and then suddenly you're trying to stretch it over, it's very much like that. You wouldn't pull a cut open. Yeah. And then with passive joint structures, it's often that the body has reached past its limit, what the muscles usually control, and then one of the backup structures, so the passive structures, is sort of taken over or try to do its job, been overworked, and then suddenly people are stretching to try and free up this joint, but that joint is no longer being very well controlled. And
so just to wind it back, just to go back a step for everyone listening at home who might have not got Phil's analogy before, what we're talking about here is load management, and we're talking about the fact that making it very, very clear that stretching is considered a load to the muscle systems and to the body in general. And so when you have a muscle that goes into some sort of a spasm or a reaction to excessive load, which can literally come about if you're really under-conditioned, it can come about by sitting in a chair. If you're sitting in a chair and you're slouching, then the body is going to be working to be trying to fight against the slouch, or to hold you in a certain posture or whatever, and you can become excessively overloaded just by doing that. And then adding stretching to that, which might feel good because it's relieving the tension, or you're pulling against the tension, it can be not good for you. It often is not what you need. You need, we're going to...
I think it can be often with the first appointment that people come in and see me, I really try and give them a flare-up strategy. So if you are in a lot of pain, here's what you can do that will make you feel a little bit better immediately. And so I think I usually, a stretch might be a part of that, as a flare-up strategy, but it's not a long-term strategy of actually building out your capacity so the muscle no longer spasms. So, like, if you overstretch a injured muscle, or if you overstretch an acute injury, that can be detrimental. But for most people who've just got like a little ache and pain, a little stretch can be a good flare-up strategy, but it's not going to be the answer for like actually building out the capacity so you don't get this spasming again. So that's a really kind of key thing I want to get across there.
And it definitely does. I think it's important that people understand that stretching is stretching and flexibility training is load, and you need to manage load.
Especially in tendinopathy injuries, which I kind of wanted to touch on briefly, where that becomes even like especially apparent for tendinopathy issues, which I've talked about a lot before. And if you haven't heard me talk about tendinopathy, don't know how you missed it, but we've done so many episodes on it. But the stretching as a load is particularly important for tendinopathy because tendinopathies are quite easily aggravated by compressive force, and often when you're stretching, what you're doing is you're taking your body through a full range of motion, which will often lead to, say, if I was going into a full hamstring stretch, so I had my hips like a pike position and going into that compressive stretch, a pike position, it means that my knees are straight and then my hip is being kind of maximally flexed, and so my hamstring is going to be on tension because my knee's straight, and now it's going to be going into that flex position, which means the attachment site for it is actually going to press because it crosses the hip joint, is going to press that tendon into the bone and compress it, which is often really aggravating for someone who's got insertional tendinopathy for a hamstring. And so people are like, oh, it feels like I've got this thing that, this tendinopathy up there, and like people's immediate response is like, oh, I just got to stretch it out because it's tight. But really what you're doing there is then you're compressing it more, which is worse, aggravating it and doesn't build up that strength. Whereas,
So far, one key insight is, if you're injured and your mind is going, okay, I want to stretch it, it's very important that you get a little bit of guidance, go and get a little bit of guidance, get a diagnosis, work with someone who sort of understands what they're talking about. And in most cases, if we go back to the title of this episode, how to stretch if you're injured, I would dare say don't.
Yeah, my advice to most people is that when they get injured and they say what stretches I should do, my advice is, at least for the first 3 days, don't do any stretching at all and see if it goes down. And then if it doesn't, if you don't feel a dramatic improvement in the pain and reduction in inflammation in 3 days, then go and see someone.
Yep. Yeah, and follow that
professional opinion.
Yeah, exactly. With that acute injury especially, it used to be RICE as the acronym, but now it's at Peace and Love, which I've also talked about a few times here. And if you haven't seen that, have a look at it. But it's basically about protecting the area. And if you're stretching, you're going into end range for that joint, which is like not protecting it's like pushing it to its sort of limit. So just keep that in mind. And I'll put a link to the Peace and Love thing just because I don't want to explain it again.
Yeah. Sweet. Got a couple of good questions here. Vinnie Brown, this is one that we've addressed a few times, but it's definitely important to address it forever, because it's something that will prevent people from progressing. And I think Rad can certainly answer this one. If a muscle cramps excessively, is there a danger of injury, or do you just push through it? Now, he's giving the example, straddle compression lifts are doing this to me. We've spoken about the two different types of cramp, something that we discussed in detail when Joachim was doing his flexibility workshop here. Why don't you jump on that
most popular podcast of all time.
So really?
Yeah, most listened to.
There
So
you go.
if you haven't listened to it.
Vinny, harden up. Just suck it up, mate. And
I was almost fearful of passing the mic over to Rad for that, because I was expecting that sort of answer. But
no, look, there's two types of cramps. There's the cramps that are chronic, and they come it can be from going for a really long run and your body becomes mineral depleted. The cramps that can be fixed when you have some of those rehydrating salts or things like that, or that will reduce in severity. And then there's the cramps that come on very, very quickly when you try and do straddle compression lifts. I don't say push through it, but I say don't worry about it. Do the best you can do. And when I get cramps like that, there's no real pushing through it for me. Like when my cramp gets bad enough, I go, and I fall back, but then I just do another couple of reps.
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about it a bit, and I think there's 3 types. I think there's a fatigue cramp, I think there's a dehydration electrolyte imbalance cramp, and then there's the like inner range muscle cramp. And so I think we've kind of, with Joachim, I was talking about those ones that come on,
slowly.
I've just really experienced on the weekend when I played 3 hours of volleyball and then into about 3 hours of surfing, and I was getting to the point where I couldn't stand up. Like I was popping up and every muscle in my body would just cramp up and I'd like fall off and I was like, I gotta go home. And basically like it's not, I don't think that's a hydration issue. Like I very heavily hydrate but fatigue and exactly what we're talking about with muscle spasming. Basically when they get overloaded, this was the ultimate version of that where I was just cooked, and it's a fatigue cramp where you've lost the ability to do work. Your muscle I'm done here, cramping up. No amount of hydration could have got me out of that.
And no amount of pushing through it will get you out of it either.
Exactly.
But when it comes to the straddle
fatigue.
Compression, you definitely can just push through and try and get an extra couple of reps.
Getting used to inner range movement, so your muscles, especially 2 joint muscles, are shortened over both joints and trying to do work.
And you'll know the difference because in the new joint movement cramp, when you pull out of the movement, it usually just disappears straight away. But when you cramp in, and I remember this when I used to play soccer or rugby league, when you've played a really hectic game and your muscles hit that point and you cramp, the only thing you can do is sort of try and stretch it out to fight against it because it's excruciatingly painful. And you'll see players playing professional sport often when it's a game. Most common when the game goes into like extra time and they're out of subs. And it's
this happened to me when I was a massage therapist with the Giants and sports trainer, and it was back early days of the Giants AFL club when basically there was a bunch of 18-year-olds because they gave all the top draft picks to this team playing against established AFL teams who are, hardened 27-year-old men, and they just got pumped by hundreds of points like game after game, and so the defenders had to do a lot of work, and one of the defenders ran off in like right towards the end of the game, and it looked like the scene from Alien where the alien's like coming out of the stomach, except it was his calf. Like it was probably mental, and like nothing he could do would stop it. It was just like this writhing mass in front of him.
Remember that footage of that triathlete back in the 90s when he collapsed and his legs went to jelly when he was just before the finish line. Do you remember that? Remember that? That came up on a video. I think it was that Eurovision movie that it was in. They did a little flashback to it. They were talking about it. I forgot how crazy that footage was. But you see him and he can't walk anymore, and he falls to the ground and he tries to stand up and his legs just go under him.
That's different to cramping though. I think that's just complete and utter.
So Lee Collins said here that hamstring curls out for me. So that's exactly right. When you're doing those inner range movements, so you're trying to go into extension at the hip and flexion at the knee. It's working that inner range. It's really common, but it's often about exposure to that stimulus. You'll get better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lee, stretches are definitely useful to prevent spasms and pain. That's a subjective. I don't even know what the research says, but subjectively, it's the only thing that stops a bad calf spasm from like when my calf goes into spasm. If I go straight into a calf stretch, it's the only thing that pulls it out.
And so this is really important to understand here, where this could be a really good flare-up strategy. So when you're in spasm, can be a nice way of relieving it. But if you then think, okay, my rehab strategy is going to be stretch my calves every day, you're not going to build up like strength and capacity and energy system efficiency, so and muscle fiber type adaptation to the activity you're doing, and you will continue to get those cramps. So it's not a muscle length issue.
And that's very important. So let's finish up this show on that, because we've
I hope that made sense. I seem maybe a bit jargony. I'm trying to keep it as clear as I can, but if you aren't understanding things, please let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. How to stretch if you're injured. Here's the thing. We've made it very clear that diagnosis is key, because you need to have a strategy, and it needs to be a sound strategy, because you can get it really wrong. And if you have a muscle tear, you can exacerbate that muscle tear by stretching it. If you have tendinopathy, depending on the tendinopathy, you can make it a lot worse by stretching it. So in those instances, it is important to speak to someone who knows a bit more than you. A physiotherapist would be my preference. For everyone else, when you're sporting a little bit of an injury, we like to say avoid stretches. and focus on strength work, focus on blood flow work, focus on, motion is lotion, keep it moving, keep the blood flowing.
Yeah, and controlled movement. Yeah.
And controlled movement. Yeah, obviously that's not a moment when we go for overload. That's a moment when we go for recovery. Finally, the cure for muscle cramping and the sensation of feeling tight and feeling like you need to stretch is not necessarily always more stretching. The reason for that muscle overloading is weakness. It's not usually tightness, and 9 times out of 10 when someone comes and complains that they always have back pain or they always have issues in their shoulders, when you test them, there might be length tension issues there, but it's usually always that they don't have the load capacity for what they're asking that area of the body to do.
So in those instances, stretching, decent flare-up strategy, but not the long-term strengthening or like rehab strategy.
Yeah, the long-term rehab strategy is usually always a combination of strength and flexibility development.
And you'll often feel better if you do a little bit of isometric exercise on the muscle that feels tight. So that can also be a good flare-up strategy. Is like if your hammies are feeling really tight, instead of stretching the hell out of them, do some static bridges and just like getting that muscle working a little bit can often just stimulate it into
Yeah. So isometric, for those playing at home who don't know the muscle contractions well, isometric is a loaded muscle without movement. So you're not doing a concentric or an eccentric movement. You're just loading the muscle still.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think this is a really important concept, and I'm glad that I've had the chance to talk about it.
Yeah,
so thanks,
absolutely. Guys, we have a big week planned. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about how much you should stretch, dosages, and this is really going to be a big one for Rad because he's had a lot of breakthroughs recently by manipulating volume of stretching, and that's the volume within a workout and volume within a week, volume within a microcycle, volume within a mesocycle. We're going to start talking about the adaptation process and how to best sort of tap in and hack that system, if I dare use the word. And then Friday, we're going to bring this in for a landing, talking about the deload and how a deload works. We are very big on our program periodization here at Unity Gym and in the UMS, Unified Movement System. And a big part of that is the way that we ramp up. We have a peak week and then we deload and really focus on the supercompensation effect and making sure that we're getting the most out of the efforts that we put in the gym. And that's kind of obvious when you're strength training, but it becomes less obvious when you are stretching and when you're working for flexibility gains. And this came off the back of, this whole series really came off the back of some comments and questions that Vinny Brown, who's on the show today, asked us over the last couple of weeks, which highlighted that, there's obviously some value that we can give you guys in discussing this stuff. And it also intertwines with my push to get Rad to do a version 2.0 of the Mobility Masterclass, which is now going to be called the Flexibility Masterclass, because we know a lot more than we used to know, and it's a big moment really, because we're renaming the 18-minute stretching routine the 18-minute mobility routine, because it really is a mobility routine, and we kind of just called it stretching because stretching was more obvious when we launched it, and we're now calling the 18-minute mobility routine the 18-minute stretching routine. Is that right? No, sorry. The stretching, it's the Mobility Masterclass, the Flexibility Masterclass.
Well, the new one is going to be called the Flexibility Masterclass because it's more accurate for what it actually is. And if you like our stretching programs and you've ever wanted a reason to get excited about something new, get excited about this one, because I can tell you right now it shits on the current Mobility Masterclass.
Ooh, and I tell you right now, there was a huge gaffe yesterday in filming. We had 2 big days of filming planned yesterday, and Rad and Richie did like 3 hours or 2 hours of it in the morning with the wrong settings on the mic and had to redo the whole day.
So sad.
Oh, it was awful.
But it'll be extra practiced and
a little part of my. And you got to understand, guys, when Rad does these, when we do these and produce these programs, Rad has to warm up and has to go through the whole process of doing and demonstrating the exercises. You can't just sort of walk out on the gym floor and make it happen. There's a whole process there. So yeah, a little part of my heart broke when the boys came in and realised that they'd stuffed up the audio.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, today was helpful. And for those, Vinny asked questions that have basically, started all of this. So for anyone who does have questions for us, we like answering them. So
yeah, absolutely.
Really,
Keep them coming through, guys. Big shout out to everyone on the podcast. We love seeing that thing take off. We love the work Phil's doing for us on that. And big shout out to everyone tuning in on YouTube. See you all soon. See you all tomorrow.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's the
far.
consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.